If you're looking for a dive watch with 200 meters of water resistance, a screw down crown, a movement that hacks and hand winds, and from a well-known respected brand, all for around $150 US, then you might be looking for this watch from Orient Sports Collection. This is the Orient Mako 2, model number FAA 02002D9. At the time of this video, you can find this watch at Jomo Shop for $145 US. Amazon has it for $155, and of course the Orient website lists it for $210 US. Hey everyone, welcome back to Eric's Everyday Watches. As always, if you like this video, if you find it helpful, please do me a favor, hit the like button and consider subscribing. This dive watch incorporates the use of Arabic numbers, making it one of the most illegible dive watches I've come across. Now the case and bracelet are both 316L stainless steel. The diameter comes in hitting that sweet spot of 41 millimeters, not including the crown. For a lug-to-lug distance, we have 47 millimeters. Now personally, my sweet spot is between 40 to 42 millimeters, so I think this looks great on my 7-inch wrist. Now the first thing that jumped out at me when I got this watch is that the bracelet and the case appear to be slightly different color. And maybe it was just the way the light happened to be coming in, but it was very noticeable. Now this is due to the different directions that the brushing is done on the case and the bracelet. The case has a radial brushing, but the bracelet has a vertical brushing, and that is why it can appear a different color. On the plus side, where the two do meet up, it's nicely done, and there's only about 1 millimeter gap, practically flush between the case and the bracelet. Now this watch has mostly a brushed finish to it, and it does appear nicely uniform throughout. On the side of the case, we see a high polished finish as well as on the side of the bracelet. Personally, I would have liked to see less of a high polished finish on a dive watch. Besides the fact that it collects fingerprints, it just doesn't seem necessary on a watch that is meant to go underwater. On the side, we also see a downturn on the lugs. This is a very wearable watch. And as I've said before, we have a lug-to-lug distance of 47 millimeters. For the case thickness, we have 13 millimeters. Overall, it's a very nice fit and finish, with no sharp edges to be found. Now before we go on, I want to get something out of the way. There were two things that jumped out at me when I first got this watch. And as I mentioned, the first one was the bracelet. But immediately after that, there was this. Do you see it? Just above the hour hand, at the 9 o'clock position, that speck, that white piece of lint or dust or whatever that is, it's under the glass. This is not a case where I just did an inadequate job of cleaning the glass before shooting my video, although that does happen sometimes. No, this is under the glass, and it bums me out to no end. This is not the quality control I expected all from Orient. This is, however, exactly why all of the watches you see on my channel, at least up to today, are from places that I know have a good return policy. Moving on the back of the watch, there is a screw down case back, helping to achieve that 200 meters of water resistance. Now I want to point out here that this is not an ISO certified watch. The text on that case back reads stainless steel, movement Japan, water resistant 20 bar, and of course, Orient automatic. And inside the case, we have Orient's in-house F6922 automatic movement. And that is a 22 joule automatic movement beating at 21,600 beats per hour. It has a 40-hour power reserve, it does hand wind, and it does hack. It also has a day-date complication at the 3 o'clock and an accuracy of plus or minus 15 seconds. Now on a side note, this movement is essentially the same as the Epson YN55 movement, which does not have the Orient branding. That Epson movement is sometimes used in non-Orient watches. The crown at the 3 o'clock position is signed. Now I have heard people online complain the crown is too small, but I measured it at approximately 6 millimeters in width and 4 millimeters in depth, which is common for this type of watch. Now in my everyday use, I did find it a bit harder to grip and turn. not because of the size, but due to the fact that it just could have more grip on it. This is a screw down crown as you'd expect with a 200-meter water resistance. Of course, you have to unscrew it to hand wind it. Setting the watch is just simply pulling out the crown to the first position sets the day of the week, rotating it in the other direction sets the date, and pulling it out to the second position stops the second hand and sets the time. Now let's move on to the face of the watch. Starting on the outside, we have a 120 click unidirectional bezel with an aluminum insert. The bezel is another part of the watch that I've heard people complain about online. And I have to agree, it's actually difficult to grip and to turn because of the shape and the angle of the bezel, but once you actually manage to get it moving, it aligns and it has zero backplay. It is definitely not the easiest bezel I've ever used, and if you happen to use your bezel a lot, this is something you want to take note of. Now inside that bezel, we have a white minute track printed directly on the blue chapter ring. Inside of that, we get to the applied white indices. Now those indices are rectangular in nature and come to a point towards the center of the dial. At the 12, 6, and 9 o'clock positions, we have white Arabic numbers which are also applied, making the dial extremely legible at a glance. Inside of that, at the 12 o'clock position, we see the Orient logo as well as automatic. And moving further down the dial at the 6 o'clock position, we find the words water resistant 200 meters. The split day date window at the 3 o'clock position is printed black on white, and in my everyday use, I had no trouble reading the day or the date. The window has an applied metallic outline to it, matching the outline of the minute and hour hands. The dial in this watch is the most impressive part in my opinion. That royal blue sunburst is absolutely stunning when it catches the light just so. In my opinion, it is really quite something to see. The sword-shaped hands on this watch are easy enough to read, but they could be slightly longer, as could the second hand, all of which could benefit from getting slightly closer to the minute track. The second hand not only stops short of hitting the minute track, but actually stops a couple of millimeters short of hitting the outside of the indices. The red arrow tip on the second hand adds a nice pop of color here, and does help keep the dial from feeling overly monochromatic. The lume on this watch is a green color, and there's a nice amount of it on the dial. The indices, the Arabic numbers, the lume pip on the bezel, and of course, the minute and hour hand are all lumed, but not the second hand. In my everyday use of testing this watch, I was able to read the time at 4 in the morning. Then that means that this watch does in fact pass my everyday lume test. Now the crystal here is a piece of mineral crystal with a beveled edge to it. And yeah, it would have been nice to have sapphire, but for under $200, and in fact closer to $150 US, corners had to be cut to keep that price down. Plus, with dive watches, I always question what should it really be. Sapphire is much more likely to shatter than mineral glass. So if you're actually diving, you might prefer mineral glass. But if you sit at a desk all day like I do, you probably prefer sapphire. But again, it is a trade-off for that low price. The bracelet on this watch is brushed on the top section and has a high polished finish on the sides. That does match the approach taken with the case itself, and like that case, it is going to collect fingerprints on the side. Now the links are solid links with the exception of the end links, which are hollow. The bracelet starts at 22mm at the lugs and tapers down to 20mm at the clasp. It is a signed clasp with a fold-over safety and 4 micro adjustments. On the inside, you have your basic pressed scissors section. In my opinion, it's a completely fine bracelet at this price point. So let's go over the specs for this watch. You get a mineral crystal, Orient's automatic F6922 movement, a diameter of 41mm, a thickness of 13mm, a lug width of 22mm, a lug-to-lug distance of 44mm, and finally a water resistance of 200 meters. And finally, let's go over the pros and cons. For pros, aesthetics. The use of the Arabic numbers in the blue sunburst style simply looks great. You get 200 meters of water resistance. It is extremely legible, there's a good fit and finish, and an automatic movement which hacks and hand winds. For cons, the brushing direction can make the case and bracelet look like a different color. The bezel is hard to turn, and the crown can also be difficult to grip and to turn. So my final thoughts on this watch. Even if I overlooked the quality control issues by saying in any mass-produced watch there's bound to be some that have issues, there are design choices here which I just can't get past. The shape of the bezel making it difficult to turn, the brushing done in different directions, and the crown not having a decent grip on it. It makes me say thanks, but maybe not, Mako. This has been Eric from Eric's Everyday Watches. Remind you to buy the watch that you love and don't pay any attention to what anybody else says or thinks. This is your watch collection. If you like this video, if you find it helpful in any way, please do me a favor, hit the like button and consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next video.